It's these small things that make such an impact on people's lives.
At Telstra, we're building a connected future. That's why we're supporting the digital inclusion of 1 million people by FY30.
The last 2 years, I've been going out and visiting libraries that are running the tech-savvy programs, and I'm just blown away. Their enthusiasm for it and the enthusiasm from the public or the participants. They're all there to learn because they realise the importance of being involved. Particularly in the regional areas, there's nothing. These are small towns, so the library is the hub.
The Tech Savvy Seniors program is a partnership between the State Library, New South Wales, Telstra and also local councils. The goal of Tech Savvy Seniors is just to enhance digital ability and just confidence in using technology in general. I think it's so important. It's crucial to be digitally connected. I think enhancing technologies, it's so easy to fall behind. The new digital age, it is a bit scary. So programs like Tech Savvy Seniors are so important in doing that. I think that really they're crucial to keeping the attendees connected to the wider society.
Everybody's so happy and a lot of comments too. I'm so excited to be able to learn how to bank online, how to send a photo, how to take a photo, how to turn the phone on, and a lot about cyber safety too. That seems to be coming up more and more. If we're not in touch with the real world, we're just not in it. It's really enriching people's lives. Once again, particularly in the rural and regional areas. It's really offering something that hasn't been there for a long time.
My role in the program is to arrive on site when the customer has a fault of any sort and answer any questions they might have. Even if I'm fixing a payphone, fixing up the Wi-Fi, we're helping them with how to do emails, how to get onto Telstra 24/7 app, especially during disaster times. They always need the help. Even if it's just giving them free data, customers need that ability to call, connect with family to make sure that everyone's okay. That's what we're here for, to advance everyone's knowledge in the digital world.
At Telstra, we know connection changes lives. We're here to empower communities and to create opportunities for everyone.
Good morning. My name is Justine Rowe and I am Telstra's Chief Sustainability Officer, and I am delighted to be here with you today to launch the 8th Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which is a collaboration of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society from RMIT and Swinburne University. It's wonderful to be here in the room in Nipaluna, but also to welcome those who are joining from our state and territory hubs around Australia in person, and also for those that are joining us online. A warm welcome. To begin, I would especially like to welcome Palawa Elder Alison Overeem to deliver a welcome to country. Alison is the State Manager for Laprina Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress in Tasmania. Alison has a strong background in advocacy and policy work supporting social justice movements and climate change initiatives. Welcome, Alison.
I'm not an elder, but I'm an auntie, so that's cool. We're here to learn together, right? I'll stick to my time. So it's an honour and privilege to be asked to provide a welcome to country today for this important conversation, this Carney, and this launch. The essence of being connected is something that is deeply rooted in the Aboriginal culture and the culture that is the oldest living culture on earth. So connectivity and being connected, although may mean something very different in what I'm going to speak about, is very much the same. My welcome to countries won't be the naming of a place and a space and leaving the room, because I think it's an opportunity for us to share and learn together. Mina, I am a proud Palawa woman from the southeast nation of Lutruwita, growing up strong in culture, advocacy, and how warrant we make spaces and places to connect with Milatina Ningi, with Mother Earth, and connect to and with each other's stories. Deepening connections to land stories sea stories and sky stories, is a way to tunapri, which in our language means to know the ancient stories and the contemporary stories and how they indeed connect to each other, abounding and surrounding us all in all that was, all that is, and all that will be. A welcome to country is much more than the naming of a space and place. It's an official invitation into all the layers of stories. Stories of struggle, stories of survival, and stories of resilience. Connecting each other and all of us to the oldest living culture on earth. Connecting not just to, but with these stories, and in particularly here in Nipaluna, to the stories of the Palawa people of Lutruwita. As Warranta, we, Lakapawa, see the richness and beauty. I didn't know where this event was, so I was going to tell you to look to your left, but it's not there, so just pretend. I'm a creative early childhood teacher, so just pretend you're looking at Kanani out there. You've ruined my speech. The resilience, and have a look, honestly, at lunchtime when you go out on country, literally out on country, at the beauty of Konanyi, Mount Wellington. When we look at that mountain, we are reminded of the significance, importance, and healing of the word connection. Konanyi is a place of cultural significance for our people, a resting place, a place woven in connection. As the rivers from the mountains flow effortlessly, I can show you, look to your right, into the Derwent and beyond and through, we are reminded that the cultural landscape is speaking to us about how we do stay connected. Those rivers, those mountains, the Punkutina, the bush, forever connected to each other. So in the cultural landscape and within our tequila, within our heart, is an innate need to be connected to each other. We're connected to the generations of the cultural landscape. It's showing us that connection and interconnection of all elements is a strength ralamapali, which in my language, our language, Todd and I's language, means strength, lots of. May the stories of connection in this space, but in that space out there, in that cultural landscape, be a gift of learning of how Warranta we all connect with each other, with country, and indeed with each other's stories. Connecting, I'll talk all day, so I'll just keep an eye on my phone. Reconnecting and weaving connections. May today be the beginning of weaving new connections and reconnections. As we all gather on Milatina Manamapli on lots of country, may those stories be your stories to hold, to hear, and to connect to. Ya Pulingina, hello and welcome. Welcome to the traditional homelands of the Muanina people. I honour and pay respects to them as the traditional owners and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, the Palawa community, my community, as the continuing custodians and the keepers of story that keep us connected to place, to the muka, to Milatina, to country. I honour and pay respects to elders past and present and warriors in the now. I honour and deeply pay respects to other Palawa mob here today. You go to an event, you're always going to find some family. So it was lovely to walk in. And I honour and pay respects to other First Peoples who are gathered from across the lands now called Australia today. As we reach out, and I know this is going all over the lands now called Australia, I would deeply like to acknowledge all First and Second Peoples gathered in this carney, in this gathering, and honour your land stories, honour your heart stories. I honour and pay respects to all that is in this room and beyond. I pay respects to all land stories held here and beyond, and may we weave a thread to keep those connected. May the connection of the 9 nations across Lutruwita, Tasmania, seek and speak to all. Because when Warranta, when we Tunapri story, when we know story, Warranta Tunapri, we know connection in its cultural and spiritual strength. In a space and place where we are connected, we often wonder as a community why we are so disconnected. I'll let that sit with you because they're different heart stories that we're talking about. Warranta takamana rala. We stand strong. When Warranta, we take the time to connect to all of the stories around us and across the lands now called Australia. Not just of how we digitally connect to each other, but how we spiritually connect to and from and with the land and with each other's stories. Anything that supports how we stay connected can be leaned into a lens that is the beauty of this landscape and what we would call cultural connectivity. It sits here, and we hope that you share in those stories. Nairi Nina Tu. Thank you. You can clap very loudly now.
Thank you, Alison, for sharing that welcome to country and for helping us to reflect on the heart stories and the connections that we can make here today, but what you have made for us in what you've shared with us today. So thank you so much. And as you reflected at the end in terms of the digital inclusion can be one of those areas of connection, and that absolutely is what we are here to talk about today. And we have been a proud supporter of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index for the last 10 years, since 2015. And we believe digital inclusion is essential for all Australians, and we are committed to working in partnership with so many of you here in the room and in the hubs around Australia, and really to help address the digital divide that still exists in Australia. We have delivered a number of programs, and there are many things to be proud of, but there is always so much work to do. But to reflect on a few programs, at the start of the session today, you saw a video about tech-savvy seniors, and that is a collaboration that we have been engaged with, certainly with the New South Wales government, for 13 years, which is awesome. There are so many opportunities like that for us to pursue going forward. We also have, I can see a very smiley face, Jess, in the room here with us today. We've had a great collaboration on AI for Good with Microsoft and Good Things Australia. And I have goosebumps when I think about some of the stories that I've heard from that amazing program. And we have also, another example is the Get E-Prepared program that we have with Justice Connect, which really is about building confidence in using digital skills, but also supporting people in their preparedness for natural disasters. With that, I would like to take a pause and introduce our Telstra's Chief Executive Officer, Vicki Brady, to share some reflections.
Thanks so much, Juz. And Wow, it's amazing to be here. Can I offer my welcome to everyone who's joining us today? And I'd also like to acknowledge the Palawa people. I also recognise and want to acknowledge that existing original and ancient connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have, yes, to the lands, to the waterways, to the sky country, right across the Australian continent. And Auntie Alison, you spoke so well about the importance of connection, not just to land and country, but to each other and to the stories. Whether they're told face-to-face or in a digital world, it's never, ever been more important than I think currently. And it really sits at the heart of Telstra's purpose and our connection to each other. I'd also like to extend my respects to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today or joining us around the country online. It is really wonderful to be here in Nipaluna to launch the 8th Australian Digital Inclusion Index in collaboration with the ADII team from RMIT and Swinburne universities. This morning, actually, I had the privilege, along with Juz and Amy, another executive from our team, to go and visit Hobart City Mission. Can I just tell you, I'm still processing what extraordinary work that organisation does. It is really providing on-the-ground, truly innovative services that are there to empower people who are absolutely in the most need, whether it's from, yes, emergency relief, probably all the things we would initially think about, but frankly, the work they're doing in digital skills training, one-on-one. We feel proud to provide something in addition for them to use the Telstra top-up program, because we know being connected when you need it most, particularly when you're in the most vulnerable circumstances, is so critical. So a small contribution of providing prepaid mobile credit is one thing we can contribute in that. The work they're doing is just so critical. And to be honest, I look at the people they're helping and some of the people we met with this morning. Yes, they face economic barriers, but actually they face really significant barriers when it comes to connectivity and digital inclusion. And they're facing these barriers at a time where, frankly, there is a growing expectation that we're connected everywhere, all of the time. And when we look at the stats today, so 97% of Australians now rely on digital devices, whether it's mobile phones, it's laptops, it's tablets. And in fact, you look at access to essential services, you think about running businesses or working from home or growing your skills, or even just the simple thing of connecting with friends and family. It's just fundamental today to be connected. And we know that absolutely being able to fully participate in that digital world is critical and essential when it comes to whether it's social outcomes, it's educational, financial, or health outcomes today. And it matters. It matters, yes, there's a big conversation about national productivity, but as us prospering as a nation, we know as more services, jobs, learning go online, it is just so fundamental. And that's why we are so incredibly proud at Telstra to have been supporting the Australian Digital Inclusion Index since its inception back in 2015. And I look at over those 10 years, it has really become the key measure here in Australia for understanding digital inclusion. And what I love about it, because I do love data, I've got to admit, when you've got a big problem to solve, being able to delve into that data, I'm itching to get my hands and dig in a bit. I've only had a little preview, so I can't wait to get into it more. But that clear view, the comparable view over those 10 years, where yes, you can see the progress, which is important to acknowledge, there is progress, but actually then to be able to dig down and understand what are those critical barriers towards getting us to be more digitally included as a country. And it is great to see and acknowledge that there has been continuing improvement in 2025, but pretty sure we're going to hear today that the index will tell us that progress is uneven. And particularly for First Nations communities, people in regional and remote areas, older Australians and those on lower incomes. There's still more than 2 million Australians that face significant barriers to digital inclusion related to, yes, access, affordability or digital ability. Now, digital inclusion is a shared national ambition. Our vision is a digitally connected Australia where everyone can thrive. That means ensuring every person has the tools, the access and the digital ability to be able to fully participate in this digital world. And as part of Telstra's Connected Future 30 strategy, we're committed to supporting the digital inclusion of 1 million people by FY30. And within that, at least 200,000 need to be in Tasmania, Northern Territory or South Australia. Now, that doesn't happen with Telstra alone, it absolutely happens in partnership. And that's partnerships with governments, it's with community organisations, it's with First Nations leaders. And importantly, we'll use the evidence from the index that will really help to show us where we can have the greatest impact as quickly as possible. So I did want to finish with a big congratulations. I know the team that does this work, it is enormous and important work that so many of us rely on across the country to be able to shape our programs and plans and have an impact. So I really look forward to listening today, to hearing more about it, and of course working with the people that are in this room, the people that are joining us around the country and online, in terms of how we continue to address the challenges that are part of really building a digitally included future. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicki, for your reflections, and really appreciate you being such a champion for digital inclusion in Australia. It definitely makes our job a little bit easier, I must say. I'd also now like to pause for a moment, and we're going to have a short video from the Honourable Minister Wells, who is wanting to share some reflections as well. Minister Wells's portfolio plays a critical role in shaping the policies and infrastructure that underpin digital access across the country. I will say it once and I will keep saying it again today, that collaboration across government, industry, academia, community groups is absolutely essential for us working together.
The Albanese government believes that every Australian should have the access and benefit from digital technology across the entire country, whether you're in Potts Point or the Pilbara. The 2025 Australian Digital Inclusion Index provides the evidence we need to identify digital inclusion gaps, target investment and track progress towards a more equitable social, economic and digital future for all Australians. Thanks to RMIT, Swinburne and Telstra for providing the ADII for the last 10 years and building community understanding of digital inclusion. Next week, I'll be launching the inaugural report and dashboard for the Measuring Digital Inclusion for First Nations Australians research project. I hope to see many of you online for that launch. Digital inclusion is essential to ensuring that every person can participate fully in modern life. Let's continue to work together across sectors and communities to bridge the digital divide and build a more inclusive, connected future for all.
I now have the privilege of introducing Distinguished Professor Julian Thomas. Julian is the Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, and also a Distinguished Professor at RMIT University in Melbourne. Julian has written widely about digital inclusion and has also followed the changes in communications opportunities over time. As Julian makes his way to the stage, that whole distance of 2 metres from me to you, Julian, get ready. I would like also to acknowledge others in the research team. Professor Anthony McCosker, Associate Professor Sharon Parkinson, Dr. Kieran Hegarty, Associate Professor Jenny Kennedy, and Professor Lyndon Ormond Parker, Associate Professor Daniel Featherston, and Katie Morrison. And I would also like to thank our colleagues at ADM+S, especially Nick Walsh, Leah Hawkins, and Matt Warren, for their support to the researchers. If you are participating in one of our hubs or online, please add any questions you may have into the chat. Our team will respond to your questions as we go, and if there are any left at the end, we will follow up with an email. Thank you, and over to you, Julian.
Digital inclusion matters because all Australians should have equal opportunities to learn and work and benefit from the new technologies of today. The Australian Digital Inclusion Index tracks digital inclusion across the Australian population over time and across space for different groups of people and in relation to all the key elements of digital inclusion. It's about people's access to the internet and to the devices they need to use digital services. It's about the affordability of those services, and it's about our digital ability, our capacity and confidence to make full use of them.
If you are not digital competent, you will be left behind. My name is Nido. I'm working with Brady Community Health Services, and I'm the project facilitator. I'm working with the Korean and Afghan and South Sudanese community. These people, particularly for the Korean, they come from refugee background where they have nothing, no internet or no iPhone. So coming to Australia, learning technology at the beginning can be challenging. Particularly it's SB challenge. So now that every day everything's go online, so people need to access information through the internet. So it is important for these people to be able to use digital skills so that they can navigate information through the online system.
One of the things that's new for this year is that we're looking at how people are using AI and who is using AI. AI's tools are being taken up rapidly, and it's important to have a benchmark to understand the barriers and challenges that some Australians may be facing. What really stood out is that almost half of Australians are already using AI tools, but it's skewed heavily towards those that are under 35, and there's also uneven distribution in terms of occupation and language groups. If you want to learn more about digital inclusion in Australia and the ADII index, you can go to the dashboard that we've created. This dashboard is for everyone. You can compare the data on the dashboard, or you can download it if you want to explore it in more detail.
The 2025 index shows the progress that we're making and where more work needs to be done. We're really proud to be delivering the index with Telstra and to be using this data to drive change.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here to talk a little bit about the index for 2025. I'm going to tell you a bit about how we put the index together and also what our key findings are. But before I do so, I wanted to also add my acknowledgement and thanks to Auntie Ellison for her warm and illuminating welcome, and to pay my respects also to all First Nations people here and in our meetings and discussions about this project across Australia. It's a privilege to be here and to be talking about this work. I also wanted to add, among those people on the large team that is responsible for this project that Justine mentioned, our our deep thanks and acknowledgement of the extraordinary commitment and dedication of our partners in Telstra, who have contributed a great deal to the thinking and the design and the execution of all of this research. So, just to say a little bit before we get into the findings about the index for this year and how we do it. As we've said, as you heard in the video, what we're trying to do is create an evidence base that can be used to support better policy in this space. And so we're trying to provide an accurate, a comprehensive picture of digital inclusion across Australia at that national, regional and local level, and also over time. Because when you put those things together, you can see how dynamic these problems are, you can see how we can make a difference when we do work together, and you can see where we need to concentrate our efforts. There are some new elements in the index for this year. I'll just talk about them very briefly. In the first place, we've modified the way we measure one of the critical elements of digital inclusion, which is affordability. I'll say a bit more about this later, but it does enable us to give a much more refined measure of that very important aspect, and I think it helps us understand more clearly where the pressure points are really emerging. The other thing that is new for this year is that we're very fortunate to be able to draw upon a much more substantial data set of First Nations connectivity and digital inclusion, building on our work with Telstra on the Mapping the Digital Gap project, and also with the Commonwealth Government, which has supported research aimed at measuring our progress towards that closing the gap target, a critical one across Australia for First Nations people. We've also, as you saw in the video, saw Jenny talking about, we've also asked a set of new sorts of questions and explored some new areas in the index report for this year, which is about really recognising actually how fast this landscape is changing. The pace of change in the digital environment is not slowing down. It's speeding up, as we'll see. So we've been asking people about generative AI. We've got some findings there. We've also been interested to go a little bit further into the way in which people are using digital technologies to work from home or to manage hybrid working relationships. So in the talk today, I'll say more about the generative AI side, the working from home aspects, and also affordability. As we've mentioned, we're going to be launching the Mapping the Digital Gap report and the work on First Nations digital inclusion over the next few weeks. So we've got 2 events coming up. I'm doing an ad for a couple of things which I think you need to know about and which are coming up. This is just the start. You're in a trilogy. It's like one of those movies where you watch the first and you realise there's a series of 3 you've committed yourself to. So next week we've got a launch for the national mapping our First Nations data on digital inclusion, and then in early December, in the first week of December on the 3rd, we're doing a big launch for the Mapping the Digital Gap work. So there's much more detail about all of that, which is a very important part of what we've been doing at those events. All of that data has fed into the results that I'll be talking about today. So we've got much richer data about that very critical area of digital inclusion for Australia. So, just to move on, this is a recapitulation really of probably what you gathered from the video. Digital inclusion is a complex problem. It's a difficult problem to solve, which is why we haven't. And one of the reasons why it's difficult is because it's got multiple components to it. So we try to simplify things as much as we can. We identify these 3 critical elements: access, affordability and digital ability. We break them down. As you can see, they've got different components in them as well. I'll say a little bit more about how we approach each of them. We put them together to create a score for Australia, for states, regions, and right down to local community levels out of 100. That index number, of course, is a synthesised figure. It only makes sense in relation to other results. So when we dig into the data, what we're interested in is comparisons and gaps, and also, of course, the trends over time, how they change. So just to say a little bit more about each of those before we jump into the findings. These are the critical components of access. It's not just about are you connected or not. It's about whether you have enough data to do the kinds of things you need to do, how frequently you connect, the kinds of devices you have, what sort of connection or connections do you have? Because as we see the digital environment becoming more complex, people doing more things and spending more time doing them, we see also that they're wanting to do a range of different things. They're using different devices for different purposes, and they've got different connections also for different purposes. So these are all critical factors when we look at measuring access. Affordability, sorry, I'm just checking the slides are keeping up with me. So, affordability is not about what people are paying for their internet. It's about whether they can afford, given their income, a decent connection. It's a really important distinction to bear in mind. This is not about what people are actually paying. It's about whether they can afford the kind of connection which we know is needed in households, for individuals, communities, to be able to access the full range of digital services which are now absolutely, as we know, very much part of our lives. We have, as I said, changed the way in which we measure affordability, and I think this is a significant improvement which allows us to come to grips with the diversity of households across Australia. So what we're now doing is gauging affordability in relation to the size of the household. If we are in a remote community looking at overcrowded houses where there are large numbers of adults, we need to take that into account when we're considering what that household has to pay for. So yes, it would be great, of course, if they can afford a fixed line connection. We think they should, but they will also need to be able to pay for mobile devices and connections for all of the people who aren't kids in that household. So this is taking into account two things, the size of the household and also registering the fact that remoteness is also a factor when we begin to talk about affordability. This gives us a measure of affordability which is tailored to the diversity, the different circumstances in which people find themselves. The last key dimension for digital inclusion is digital ability, but this is actually also critically important, and it's where we see an enormous amount of work going on, some significant improvements over time, and also some trends which we need to address. As you can see there, digital ability comprises a whole range of different capabilities and skills. And what we're trying to do here is keep up with the extraordinary array of things that people are increasingly doing online. If you think about generative AI, for example, which we'll come to talk about in a little while, that is to use that effectively and as well as possible is going to increasingly depend on people's skills, technology skills and also literacy skills in terms of managing information and knowledge sources. So they're the three elements of the index. let's look at the key findings. This is our national picture for 2025. And what you can see here is an average figure for Australia and a score for the whole country. And then what's interesting to look at is some of the differences. Where are we diverging from that? We can see that the capital cities taken together are registering higher digital inclusion scores than the national average. We can see that when we look outside the big cities, we find lower scores. We can also see, of course, that these figures vary across state to state. So the darker orange states and territories, well, you can't really see the ACT there, but it's got its own little bubble, are above the national average. The paler ones are below. You can start to see why it is that we might be focused, to some degree at least, on what is happening in South Australia, Northern Territory and Tasmania, if we're concerned about digital inclusion. You can see that, well, just to say something very briefly about not just what you see there, the national picture as it sits, but what's happened since we looked at this last in 2023. And it is significant because these numbers have moved. As I said, because we've changed the way we measure affordability, we can't compare that any longer with what we had. But we can compare access and ability, and on both scores, we see considerable improvement. So nationally, since 2023, access scores have increased by almost 5 points, and ability scores have increased by almost 9 points. So these are significant changes that we'll talk a little bit more about as we go along. This is, again, that geographic distribution. To some degree, how connected you are in Australia depends on where you are. And we can see, just looking at this, that gap between the cities and regional Australia over on the left of the screen, but we can also see that there's a real spread across the states, and that Tasmania is recording the lowest digital inclusion index scores for the states and territories. It's interesting that that is the case across all three dimensions. So if we look at access, if we look at affordability, if we look at digital ability, we see that gap that we see there. Tasmania is 4 to 5 points perhaps below the national average on all those measures. It's improving. It's improving. So those figures have improved, but they have not improved as much as we've seen across the rest of the country. Okay, so you've seen that now. I'm going to show you a horrible chart. I'm glad there are people here who love data, because there is a lot of data on this, and I hope over on the left-hand side of the room that people can see that. But this is really the story of, it's not just where you live, it's who you are as well. How connected you are depends on who you are, what kind of community you're a part of. So on this chart, over on the left-hand side, there's a dark blue column which shows you the national average, and then again, the point is to compare that with all of those other social and community and demographic groups. You can, and what you see, of course, is some really significant gaps, some steep gradients, as we would say, across those different communities. So if you look just across the chart to see where the shortest columns are, you can find them. When we look at employment, when we look at income and the lowest quintile of household income, when we look at education, when we look at age, housing, what kind of housing people have, what kind of family composition they have, and whether you have a disability or not. These are all critical factors in shaping your experience of the digital economy and the digital world. Remember, of course, that many of the people who are represented in one way or another in these statistics are in multiple groups. So there are compounding factors at work, and we see those in reality every day when you visit places like the Mission or other locations. That's what we're encountering. So this simplifies it and probably oversimplifies it, but it does show us where the critical gaps are. So let me turn to just looking at the data as a whole. What are some of the kind of really major sorts of the most prominent and visible things that we see? Bearing in mind what I said, that we are seeing improvement, we are seeing ongoing increases in the levels of digital inclusion nationally. But we are also seeing a continuingly substantial proportion of the population who are effectively excluded from digital services and the digital economy. So this is the group that we refer to as digitally excluded or digitally highly excluded. They have digital inclusion scores which are substantially or very substantially below our average figures. This means that we have around 1 in 5 of the Australian population struggling to access digital services if they can access them at all. And as we've been saying, as we all know, we know how important those services are for the way we live our daily lives, the way we conduct our work, all of those things. We can also see that around 10% are mobile only. So that is the only connection they have to the internet and to digital services. Mobiles are great, but they are not great for everything. This is really the result of what we were describing earlier as a complex digital environment in which we're now living and working. So we use mobiles for lots of things, but we have other digital tools which we need for work and for study. And mobiles may not be those devices all the time. So there are real challenges in relation to this group in particular. We're seeing also that a substantial proportion of Australians are compromising, making decisions to compromise their access on the basis of cost. In other words, affordability is a challenge, it's a problem, it's a barrier. Connection is not just a nice-to-have thing for people. It's a must-have, but you need to be able to connect without compromises. Lastly, that figure that Jenny mentioned in the video, we're now seeing almost half of Australians using generative AI tools frequently. So we'll say a bit more about that as we go along. Just to summarise perhaps what's come out of all of this data around the social distribution of digital inclusion, we're seeing the persistence of some really critical gaps. There's a gap between First Nations people and other Australians, non-First Nations Australians. That's 10.5 points. That's very significant when we remember that we have a closing the gap target in relation to this area where we're supposed to be aiming to achieve parity. We want to close that gap. We want to close that gap next year. So there's a lot to do in a short period of time. There's a very significant disability gap. There's a significant gap in terms of outcomes for people who have not finished secondary school and those who have a university degree. There's a substantial age gap. It has narrowed a bit. I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's still clearly significant. And there is a very substantial gap between, in terms of income. Now, this is the the one piece of data I'll show you about the First Nations digital inclusion results. It's really to tease you, to bring you along next week and in December to find out a lot more, but it does just complicate that story about the gap a little bit. A lot of that is about, again, where you are. So how your experience of digital services will depend a great deal on where First Nations communities may be. The gap increases dramatically once we start to look at remote and very remote services. So you can see that gradient at work with that slide. I'm going to jump back to our 3 dimensions just to talk a little bit about some of the key findings in each of those before we go on to generative AI and working from home. Just to say one key thing about access. This question of how we respond to mobile-only connectivity is a critical one. As I said, we've got almost 10% of the population who are mobile-only users. That means there's a lot they cannot do online. If they're parents of children, it means there's a lot their children can't do online. It's very difficult to do your homework, or to study, or to find a job, or all of those sorts of things sometimes if you don't have a laptop or a desktop or those kinds of computing devices. But you see that percentage is significantly higher for a range of groups across the country. If we look at First Nations people, it's not 10%, it's 25%. If we look at public housing residents, very dependent on government services, of course, it's getting close to 20%. Those lowest income households are up there as well, 18%. If you didn't complete your secondary school, it's 17%. If you have a disability, it's 14%. And if you rely on government services, on government support for a main part of your income, or if you work outside capital cities, it's also higher than that figure. So the point about all of these communities is they need to be connected. They need to be able to find information online, interact with service providers, whether they're government agencies, community sector organisations, commercial entities. But all of those services are, of course, now migrating or migrated. They've gone. They are online. So how do you do that if you only have a mobile connection? Say a bit more about affordability. So this is the sort of second version of that horrible chart. You saw the first one with socio-economic distribution. This one boils it down to, we're just talking about affordability, okay? So, and again, you can see some very steep gradients when we look at employment, when we look at income, education, when you look at housing or household composition, again, all of these things, and disability as well in particular, you can sort of see there's a very steep decline with affordability. So what we're seeing here is where the pressure is, and the new measure we have is really helping us to do that. Just to dig into it a little bit more, so this is the proportion of people who are sacrificing or cutting back on essential expenditure in order to stay connected. As I said, connectivity is now, it's not a nice to have, it's a has to have. So what are people doing? And the column on the left-hand side of this chart gives you the national averages. And you can see that there are about 14% of Australians who sometimes need to cut back. About 5% of them do so often or they do it every time. If you then look across the chart to the right-hand side, you can see if we're thinking about the different circumstances of people with different kinds of household composition, different kinds of families, if you look at a one-parent family, it's a very different picture. So you have, if you take those two categories of sacrificing or cutting back, that is occasionally or often or always, we've now starting to get close to 40% of them are cutting back on essentials in order to pay for connectivity. What we're trying to say is that there is now a lot of evidence that we need to do more about affordability. Just to show you a couple of charts about the digital ability dimensions. As I mentioned, these are really interesting because we have seen change over time. And on this slide and the next, you'll see the differences between this year, 25, the last time we reported in 23 and 21. And so when we look at this slide, which shows the gradient in relation to age, you can see that while the gaps grew when we measured this in 23, they've now narrowed somewhat, but they're still very substantial. This shows the same thing, except this time we're looking at school completion, so how much education people have. And again, what we're seeing is a narrowing gap, but nevertheless a still sizable one. We can talk about why this might be. There are different theories about what's going on. The critical point is there's still a great deal of work to do, clearly, in relation to digital ability. There has been significant improvement, as I saw. That is great to see, and I think reflects the commitment and investment in that area from governments, communities, and corporations over a long period of time in this country, but there is still clearly a great deal to do, looking at those three waves of data. Okay, so just to finish, I suppose, to give you an overview of what we've found in relation to generative AI, this might look familiar now. It's that horrible slide again, except this time we're talking about generative AI. But you can see actually that the gradients are even steeper because what we're looking at is an emerging technology. And there are very specific groups of Australians who are more likely to be using generative AI than others. They're younger, they're graduates, they're studying, they're professionals. It's very interesting to see also that a high proportion of people who speak languages other than English at home are using generative AI tools significantly more than other Australians. And they're clearly using these tools for translation and a range of language and text-based tools. This slide tells you a little bit about the kinds of things that people are doing with AI and what they're creating when they're using generative AI. So it's not just text. They're doing a lot. They're making images, they're coding, they're creating audio, and they're using AI in order to do a really diverse range of tasks. So to some extent, they're doing the kinds of things they might have done with search engines or are now doing with Gen AI augmented search engines, but they're also creating content for work or for fun. They're seeking social connection with chatbots. So a whole range of things. What this shows us is that even though we're only really still at an emergent stage of the social uptake of this technology, it is now already, we can say, in Australia, a general purpose technology for almost everybody who's using it, and it's entirely integrated into people's everyday lives and work. I thought I'd finish by showing you a little bit of our data about working from home, which is extraordinarily interesting, I think. Another area of dramatic recent change where we see digital inclusion across all those dimensions as critical. We see it's fast moving. We see a situation which is where there's an uneven distribution of people working from home. One thing I wanted to point out, it's important, is that this is a chart which shows that Hobart is tracking exactly with Sydney and Brisbane and other leading states when we come to working from home. So that, I think, is significant, and we can talk about why that might be. Melbourne wins the gold medal. I'm not sure if they're all super happy about it, but it does, as way out in front when it comes to this. I'll finish by just saying a little bit about what's coming up. I mentioned our key events where we're launching the work on First Nations digital inclusion, but I'm encouraging you to jump online and have a look at the project dashboard. If you love data like Vicki does, this is where you go. This is where you can find out more about who's working from home, and especially more about who's using generative AI and why they're doing it. So take a look at that. I'm just going to, we're back at that, yes. I wanted to end anyway by expressing my thanks to the amazing team of people who have done all the work on bringing this project together at RMIT, at Swinburne, in our ARC centre, and also our colleagues in Telstra who have made such a significant contribution. They are very engaged. They ask us lots of questions. So anything you ask us today, we've already had. And they're also creative partners in the whole exercise. So a big thank you. The story of digital inclusion is yes, it is complicated. Yes, you have to look at a lot of different elements of all this in order to bring the picture together. But if we can collaborate, as we were saying before, if we can collaborate and bring the data together, we can make a positive difference in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. There are so many data points that you have shared, some very interesting slides, some that I was able to follow more than others, but some great insights, and a real privilege for us to hear from you with your reflections on the data and the report. At this point, we are heading to our panel section of the session today. And so for those that are joining from the state and territory hubs, it's farewell from us, and I will hand you over to the very capable hosts on the ground in your respective centres. For those of you that are joining online, stay with us. We are now going to introduce in Hobart some of our panel members. So farewell to the hubs, stay online, and also you stuck with me here in the room. So the panellists for today, you have already heard from the wonderful Professor Julian Thomas. He will be joined by Professor Anthony McCosker, Ms. Adrienne Picone and Mr. Justine Thurley. Anthony is a Professor of Media and Communications at Swinburne University. He's also the Director of Swinburne's Social Innovation Research Institute, as well as Node Lead and Chief Investigator and the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. Adrienne has a long-standing career in the community services industry and a wealth of experience working with local, state and federal governments. She is passionate and an advocate for those living on low incomes and experiencing disadvantage. Justin is the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Premier and Cabinet here in Tasmania. He leads whole-of-government initiatives on digital inclusion, policy, governance, cybersecurity, and the delivery of digital infrastructure and services. Welcome. Please join me up here at the front. I'm going to lean gracefully on the podium and you are each going to take a seat, please. I'm going to start with a few questions from our panellists, but I also do encourage questions from the floor. So Aidan will be walking around with a roving mic. If there are no questions from the floor, Aidan's going to come a little bit later with some questions that might have been shared online. So firstly, Adrienne, I'm going to start with you if I can. Does what you heard from Julian ring true with what you're seeing here on the ground in Tasmania? And importantly, for vulnerable circumstances, people living in vulnerable circumstances more broadly?
I wish I could say I was surprised by the report, but unfortunately I wasn't. And I guess I just also want to start by saying I really just want to say thank you to Telstra and the team for providing this data and how important it is for you to be doing it regularly so we can really start to tell the story. And I heard Auntie Alison say how important it is for us to tell stories of struggle and survival. And I think that's what this is about. This is about really understanding the disadvantage and the experience of Tasmanians and all Australians so that we can actually do something about it, so we can actually start to think about how we can actually turn this around. I think what we're hearing in Tasmania, so we've seen that across all three indices, Tasmania is sitting pretty much at the bottom, I think second to bottom in access, only to the Northern Territory, which is what we've had over the last few years as well. I think we're sort of either bottom or second bottom. Clearly that's just not good enough, and we really need to do something about that. But I guess I'd just say in terms of access, certainly what we're hearing, and I can think of several stories off the top of my head, particularly that reliance on mobile-only data and devices. We're certainly hearing a lot from particularly families with school-aged children where they're doing things like accessing homework opportunities on the internet on their mobile phone and then taking screenshots so that they don't use up too much of their data, or things like families where their children that need to access online tutoring, maths tutoring, that haven't been able to access that because the device is too old or it's just not compatible with the information. So there's so many examples that I can give you of that access issue that we have here in Tasmania. In terms of affordability, I mean, I think Tasmania, we often hear labels about ourselves as being the sickest, the oldest, the poorest state in the country, the most digitally excluded state in the country. Really we're seeing this in the context of a cost of living crisis that we have here, a housing crisis. We're seeing more and more Tasmanians absolutely in survival mode and really, making decisions about whether they pay their rent or put food on the table or pay their electricity bills. So quite often things like actually getting an efficient and effective device or having access to the internet comes way down the line for people. It feels like it's a nice to have and something that's a real privilege rather than what it really should be, and that should be an absolutely essential service. We hear from so many Tasmanians when we do focus groups and talk to Tasmanians on low incomes just about how they're feeling more and more that they're being locked out of participation. And I think it's pretty hard to look for a job or access education or even look for a house, actually, if you haven't got access to a device and to the internet. I think it's the area of ability, though, that really saddens me the most because I do think with those other two, there are opportunities. It's almost like it's a bit of a transactional opportunity that we can have a transactional solution. Like if we really throw enough money at this. There really are some solutions that we can put in place in the short to medium term. But I think in terms of ability, in Tasmania we have nearly 50% of our population, our adult population, doesn't have literacy function for daily functional life. So they can't read things like the newspaper or their, the instructions on their medicine or their street signs. So when you think about that, then that compounds into the into issues around digital ability as well. So that's obviously the bit that requires significant investment, and there is some really good things that are happening already in Tasmania, both at the state government level, also at the community services level. I know Code of Tasmania is running some great programs around linking older people with younger people in Tasmania to build their digital ability. But really, that's the bit to me that I think really requires significant investment, and it's about early intervention, and it's really about working across all government departments, not just doing it in sort of a piecemeal approach, which is, I think, sometimes the way that it happens here, but really, drilling down and being able to bring about some changes in the medium to long term.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. And some of the reflections are quite stark in terms of what you are observing, but also there is the opportunity for the collaboration, particularly on the digital ability side. And I agree with you that there are some great programs and some initiatives that are happening, but there does feel like there's so much more opportunity if we kind of come together. So, Justine, did you have any reflections? Thank you for joining us on behalf of government. And did you have any reflections on what Adrienne has shared or Julian's insights?
Oh, look, the first thing I want to just point out is I'm really grateful for the work that's Telstra sponsored here and the research that was been done. It's clear there's a research contribution there that's going to hopefully influence policy and the way that we see ourselves here in Tasmania as well. One of the real interesting things here, and I think, we would acknowledge some of the issues that we do have in Tasmania, and the research itself acknowledges these issues. And Adrienne, you also acknowledged is that we do have some structural and demographic challenges in Tasmania, which includes the things that you mentioned: lowest incomes, oldest population, and also the lowest levels of the educational standing. They are really important factors in this. But I just want to, I've been tracking this for some years, the whole research as it is. And I think the thing we want to acknowledge is the massive change that we've seen across Tasmania in our improvement. We were really 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, I do acknowledge the digital landscape was different, but we have really seen a large-scale change in where we sit. And it's lost, I think, it's possible to paint a crisis here. I think what we should be doing is looking at what's been successful and where we've actually run some pretty good programs, and that includes everything that's been done inside, outside of government and everywhere that has been really, really, really good. And some of the things that we don't do in government, I think, is probably promote the fact that we've been doing a lot of work in that space. For those who aren't aware, we have, for the last 4 or 5 years roughly, had a program in place, or a strategy in place called Our Digital Future. It had a community component of it which was very focused on digital inclusion. The way that we chose to implement that, primarily through a range of different programs that we ran in conjunction with industry, etc. But we also internally to government made it part of the way that we were delivering our services. And I'll call out the fantastic work that's been done in literacy and capability within the libraries area. And we've actually had some good outcomes there. And I think it shows in the results that we've had for ability. It's come through. We're actually up there, and we've maintained our point of difference, or the gap has not got bigger when it comes to ability. We've maintained at least getting that moving, and that's the most substantial change. But the challenges do remain, and I'm not going to underplay those challenges. And I think that there's a big opportunity for us to reset and have a bit of a look at that. And right now we have our digital future. The last 5 years, as far as we're concerned, that needs to be rethought, repositioned, and we're doing a refresh on that strategy that we called out earlier in the year. We got stuck in the middle of an election, so we had to pause our work there. But we are now restarting that work, And we have already obtained a lot of public consultation that actually suggests that there are initiatives that we can look at as a government, but also the role that industry and also the community can play in achieving that. So we are hoping to build a framework to work together with industry and also the community to make new initiatives possible. So that's still in the wild, as we'll call it, and we're still working through that. We're doing direct consultations with stakeholder groups, communities, and if there's anybody here that's really interested in talking to us more, we'd be happy to have a chat. Just reach out to me. I've got Georgia here over here. We'll be more than happy to have a chat as well. So we think, yeah, look, as far as I'm concerned, this is good information for us to work with. Really identifies areas that we can focus on. It's also in relation to some of the place-based issues that we have, because if you look at the Tassie situation, it's all pretty happy here in Hobart, but you look in some of those regional areas, and particularly the islands, where we've got a few challenges, although there has been some changes there recently in some of the infrastructure, but that's not the full story. So yeah, that's probably my response to some of that, and I do agree that it'd be great to see us progressing further and more quickly on this.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I do think the framework that you're talking about and the consultation that you've been undertaking and engaging with, and really that's our opportunity to reach out and make sure that we are engaged in that consultation and being part of helping to develop the framework and what programs sit behind that framework. So thank you, Justin. A question for you, Anthony. AI is kind of a bit of a thing and a bit of your thing. So I was really interested in your reflections on the having AI as part of the digital inclusion research this year and what your reflections were.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I am very conscious that AI is a topical issue that sometimes makes some people roll their eyes. And I think that's actually a bit of it's an important thing to pick up on. The reason that we have asked questions about generative AI and generative AI use in this survey round is that it really tells us something about digital abilities. When technologies like this come along and they, it's one of the first things that pops up on our mobile phone. If you say the wrong word, it will pop up automatically and ask you questions about what is it that you want? What do you want me to tell you? It's our new interface to information, and we know that from our findings that people are turning to generative AI, to chat tools, to make decisions in their life, and that's extraordinarily important to track and to understand. So when these kind of technologies come along and reshape the digital environment, we need to look carefully at what that does for digital abilities. So we know that digital abilities, as you said, Adrienne, that it's one of the most difficult things for us to work on. It's something that is easily derailed by these kind of changes. In the report, we give an example of Marie, who is a 75-year-old woman who, has gotten online, has gotten a phone, has managed to learn a few apps, and makes the point that as soon as the app changes, which is an automatic update, all of a sudden she's got to start again. And this is the sort of thing that generative AI tools do. It knocks and dents the confidence of many precarious internet users and digital users, and it reshapes that scenario of participation greatly. So a couple of things from our findings that I think that are really important to keep an eye on. We see that 80% of students are using generative AI tools, and so they're at the forefront of learning, trying to understand how these tools work, what they can do with them. They're reshaping their education. They're thinking about what it means for their employment, for their professions. However, at the other end of the spectrum, people who have dropped out of high school, non-completers, are the absolute lowest users. So less than 20% have even entertained playing around with generative AI tools. And if you think about that figure that we always see, that around 20% of the population are digitally excluded, we have to keep an eye on who's missing out at every age level. So, you know, one thing that we can say is that our findings around generative AI use are kind of like an exaggerated mapping of the demographic, socio-economic and demographic factors that are shaping digital inclusion. So older people are less likely to be using generative AI tools. People with disability are less likely to be using generative AI tools. As Julian pointed out, the one interesting finding was that our multilingual Australians are higher users. Now, that's really interesting for a number of reasons. It is one of those indicators that generative AI tools have capabilities that are really useful, that can overcome some of the gaps. And actually, one of my favourite uses of ChatGPT or Copilot is to put in some really complex scientific language that we always have to deal with and read and try to interpret, and say, can you rewrite this in simple English? And if you think about that in terms of that, you know, literacy gap in places like Tasmania, it's an enormous potential benefit. But I'll just end by saying, end this rant, by saying that, you know, probably one of the issues for us is that it's very easy for these tools to fail those people who need them the most. So we're not seeing the translation into useful assistive technology for people with disabilities. We're not seeing really amazing uses and applications for people in First Nations communities who could be using these tools for a whole range of things, for their language uses, for cultural preservation, for telling their stories. Instead, we do see some of these extractive and, you know, limited kind of capabilities, or the focus on high-end professions and those who can afford to use premium services. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And I think, as you say, it's an early indicator and one to watch. And I do think that it does have the capacity to engage further or divide further, and how we engage with those tools and actually support others in engaging with those tools is really critical. So thank you so much for sharing those reflections. I know Julian said a few things earlier. I don't know if anyone's got any questions for Jill. Oh, here we go. Yes. I'll hand, John's going to hand you. If you can just say who you are and then ask your question, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. Rod McDonald, I'm the Mayor at Tasman. I'd just like to go back in time a bit. Back in the 1960s in this country, Telecom rolled out copper lines, the technology of the day. It went to every household, highway and byway. You see them in the bush everywhere, the little white pipes with the yellow labels on them, and they're still there. And everyone got it, so everyone was connected. No matter where you were, you had a phone line. The challenge, and of course that was the technology of the day. Today I contend that the fibre is the way to go, and we've probably, our biggest challenge I think at the moment is that we've commercialised the network, so it has to earn a dollar. And so the old days of subsidy has been replaced by a bit of black spot funding. So whilst I see the changes, and I've followed this probably for the last 8 years since it started, that there has been improvement, but it's marginal points here and there. So we don't see that real paradigm shift. And I'm just interested in looking at the Tasmanian figures, particularly that we're about a third of people that aren't connected. I know people in our community aren't, and they can't get a service because of the terrain, and they're in black spot. So I guess how do we, and a good one for Julian, how do we overcome that and change our service model from just the odd black spot funding that's under a lot of competition to get into a model where we can actually roll out services across? And I guess the second part of that's in relation to the working from home has become such a big thing, and it's, you know, what sort of networks are we building and what sort of accommodation do we look into the future?
And Julian, sorry, thank you. Julian, just as you're reflecting on your answer, it'd be good if you can draw out around NBN fibre and then the other technologies, which you probably were, but I was just going to check.
No, and I think that's absolutely a kind of critical part of this whole story. I really do agree that I think we need the same sense of shared purpose and commitment to connect everybody that we had in the period you were looking back to. And I think if we look further back than that, right through the history of the Australian Federation, there is actually an ongoing argument and an ongoing commitment to making sure that Australians across the country have access to the communications infrastructure that's required. So it is really important that we retain, maintain, sustain that sense that we cannot afford to leave people behind. In terms of the infrastructure, it's clearly a more complex mix now, and we are dealing with the challenges of making sure that people can do a far wider range of activities remotely, online, than was even the case 5 or more years ago, and was even the case, certainly, the scope of things that we now expect to do online exceeds those things that were talked about when the NBN was being formulated and designed back in the late 2010s and the early 2010s. We're dealing with a moving target. The investment in extending NBN capability that is now being made is absolutely a move in the right direction. That is really important. It is really important that there is continuing investment in improving mobile networks. Part of our argument that comes through the data we've collected and we're reporting on is that what we call fixed and mobile services are both really important to people now. So the infrastructural requirements are more complex, they've multiplied, but they are no less significant than they were back in the 60s or the 70s when we were rolling out copper. They're both absolutely critical, and there is no doubt also that we are going to be significantly and substantially drawing on the new global infrastructures of low Earth orbiting satellites. They will also be an important part of the picture, especially for remote and very remote Australians. There's a lot happening across all of that space. There's a lot of work to be done, I think, on making sure that as that happens, those services that are made available, accessible, possible for people are affordable. So, and this is not just about the cost of low Earth orbiting satellites, it's also very much about NBN. Our sense is that it is vitally important that there are affordable NBN services. We see that as a really important part of the challenge that you're talking about. It's one thing to roll out the network, it's another thing to make sure that the market that you create is meeting people's needs.
Great question, and thank you so much for your reflections, Julian. And I do support what Julian has said, but I also acknowledge that in the meantime, if your experience is not meeting your expectations or the constituents that you are representing is not their experience is not meeting their expectations, then there's more for us to do. So I acknowledge your question. I'm not walking past the fact that you're not experiencing the service that you expect. There is context to it, but I'm not walking past that. So thank you for raising. We've probably got time maybe for one more question, if you can bear with me. Okay, great. Oh, was it a...
Oh, we've just got some WebEx excitement going on.
Oh, quick.
So I don't want to
wow, WebEx excitement. Okay.
And a lot of the excitement in WebEx has been people sharing the initiatives that are happening in their local areas.
Great.
And there's been just this laundry list of all of these great programs and all the great work. So the question then is, how do we better coordinate so that we can have the best impact?
Thank you for your question. I might see if anyone from the panel would like to answer, otherwise I can share a point of view. Thanks, Adrienne.
I think that is a great question, and I think it's great to end with a bit of forward-focused thinking. Because, I think that this is why this data is so important, because it can be the spark for action and can really help us to turn things around. Yeah, we're really keen here in Tasmania to coordinate a round table early in the new year, and that will bring together business, community services, people with lived experience of digital exclusion, coming together to really understand what's happening here and some of the solutions that we really need to focus on. So we would love to coordinate or actually at least communicate with our colleagues across the country and really understand what's going on. Because, as Justine said earlier, there is some really good things that are happening here, both from the government and Libraries Tas, but also in the community sector. But we really need to do more to build on that and coordinate that.
I'd echo that. Is that the real thing for us, and particularly from a government policy setting perspective, is that it's all good for government to be doing things, but the community and the industry in particular needs to have some skin in the game, and we want to see that as part of the conversation. Is it's all three of those areas that are involved. We know that there are some really interested industry partners that really want to participate in areas where they can. They see obligations as well as they see just general interests in what they do from a social benefits point of view. So there's we do have a lot of industry in Tasmania that's interested in this aspect of things too. We have, certainly Tas government is engaged with Microsoft the same way as Telstra has, and we know they would like to come to the table as well, along with a few others that are very interested in this space. So and that notwithstanding is that we do also have commercial organisations that are really, really keen to sort of sit on the ground. So we're keen to see that coordinated. We need to have it not driven by government, but also by the people that feel that they can make a difference. And also, and I like the idea that we actually need to understand specifically around what some of the issues that have been faced by individuals as well. So they're really important. So so completely agree that they're the type of things we should be looking at, and there are good programs.
Thank you so much, and great question. In the meantime, if we can, what we'll do at Telstra is pull those ideas together and share them back in a coordinated way. Leave that with me, what that's actually going to mean, but we'll work that out. We'll share it back, and at least we'll kind of have in one place where the different ideas have come together from the session today. Also, in terms of that theme around collaboration, one of the best ways we can also work together is actually through the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance, and they are an organisation or a group of organisations that actually come together for this purpose of actually sharing ideas and testing each other and collaborating together. So that's also another avenue that is available from a coordination perspective. But please do rest assured we will pull those insights together and those resources together and play them back to you. I did just want to, we are at time. I'm sorry we didn't get to your question and to all of the questions that were online. Thank you so much for joining us either online or in the room for the 2025 launch of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. A special thanks to all of the people on the Telstra team who have collaborated to bring us together today and have provided insights and working together with the amazing research team. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the event. So if you, I think there'll be a QR code on the screen, maybe in a minute, and also the results of the index are actually now live on the website as well, so there'll be a screen grab for that as well. And thank you again all so much for engaging with us, and we look forward to speaking again very soon. That's it for today.